You know, when you look around, from the deepest parts of the ocean all the way to the highest mountains, our planet is just packed with an incredible amount of life. And for centuries, we've had this deep-seated need to make sense of it all, right? To organize it, to find some kind of order in what looks like beautiful chaos. So this is really the story of that quest, our journey to map out the vast territory of life. I mean, it's a huge question, isn't it? You've got millions of species on Earth. Where do you even begin to make sense of all that? This is the exact puzzle that scientists have been trying to solve for centuries: how to create a system that works for every single living thing. Okay, so here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start by looking at those early, kind of simple, and let's be honest, often wrong attempts to classify life. Then we'll get into the game-changing five-kingdom system that really became the standard. And finally, we're going to take a closer look at three of the most amazing kingdoms: Monera, Protista, and Fungi. All right, so our story kicks off with a really simple, almost intuitive idea. If it's not a plant, well, it's gotta be an animal. And that was the foundation for our very first scientific stabs at classification. But as you're about to see, this created some pretty big problems. The first really big scientific effort came from Aristotle. He just used simple, visible traits. Then you have Carl Linnaeus, who formalized all of this into that famous two-kingdom system. You've got Plantae for plants, Animalia for animals. And honestly, it was a pretty neat and tidy system that stuck around for a long, long time. That is, until R.H. Whittaker showed up in 1969 and basically proposed something way more detailed. So what was the big deal? What was so wrong with the old way of doing things? Well, it was simple, but maybe too simple. It totally ignored these massive differences at the cellular level. I mean, it was lumping single-celled organisms in with complex multicellular ones. Just think about it for a second. This system put things like fungi, which can't photosynthesize, into the exact same plant box as green algae, which do. The categories were just way too broad, and the system wasn't really reflecting what was actually happening in biology. So you had this growing list of organisms that just didn't fit nicely into the plant box or the animal box. It became obvious that a new approach was needed. And this is exactly where R.H. Whittaker's work became a total game changer. He gave us a new framework that could actually handle the true complexity of life. So instead of just looking at what an organism looked like on the outside, Whittaker's system went much, much deeper. It started asking more fundamental questions. Things like, what's its cell structure like? How does it get its food? How is its body organized? And, really importantly, how was it related to other organisms on an evolutionary level? This was a much more solid way to build the family tree of life. And this table right here, this is basically the blueprint for the entire five-kingdom system. The first huge division is all about the cell itself. See how Kingdom Monera is all by itself as prokaryotic? That means its cells don't have a true nucleus. Everything else is eukaryotic. And from there, the distinctions get even more specific. Like, what's the cell wall made of? For fungi, it's chitin. For plants, it's cellulose. Or how does it get its food? You can see it's a really powerful and logical way to sort, well, all of life. All right, let's dive into our first kingdom, Monera. Now, this group contains the oldest, the most widespread, and by far the most numerous organisms on the entire planet. We're talking about bacteria. So, Monera are the only members of the prokaryotic world. Yup, we're talking about bacteria. And these guys are the absolute masters of survival. You can find them in every single habitat you can think of, from a handful of dirt to the most extreme environments imaginable, like volcanic hot springs or deep-sea vents where literally nothing else can live. Now, even though their internal structure is pretty simple, they do come in four main shapes. You've got the spherical ones called cocci, the rod-shaped ones called bacilli, the spiral-shaped spirilla, and the comma-shaped vibrio. Let's actually take a look at what a couple of these look like up close. So first up, we have the cocci. You can see their perfect little spherical shape. And when you see them all clustered together like this, it's really easy to picture how they form these colonies, all working together in their tiny microscopic world. And next, we've got the bacilli, with that very distinct rod shape. A lot of the most well-known bacteria, both the helpful ones and the harmful ones, belong to this group. It's just incredible to think that these tiny little structures are complete, self-sufficient living things. Okay, moving on to our next kingdom, Protista. This is such a fascinating and just incredibly diverse group. It's kind of a catch-all category for single-celled eukaryotes, and it's basically the evolutionary link to the other three eukaryotic kingdoms: plants, animals, and fungi. One really amazing group within Protista are the cruciferophytes, and that includes these diatoms. Just look at that intricate structure. Their cell walls are actually made of silica, which is basically glass, and they fit together like a little box. They are super important producers in the ocean. And over billions of years, their fossilized shells have built up to form what we call diatomaceous earth. Now, this organism is a dinoflagellate. Most of them have these two flagella, which are like little whip-like tails they use to get around. And while a lot of them are totally harmless, some species, like Goniolax here, can suddenly have these massive population explosions, turning the sea red and releasing toxins that can be really dangerous for other marine life. Now, meet Euglena. This little guy is a perfect example of why Kingdom Protista is so tricky to define. See, in the presence of sunlight, it's photosynthetic, just like a plant. But if you take away the light, it switches its strategy completely and starts hunting and eating other smaller organisms, acting just like an animal, a true biological shapeshifter. And for our last example from this kingdom, we have the protozoans. These are often thought of as the primitive relatives of animals. This one here is a paramecium, and it's covered in thousands of tiny hair-like structures called cilia. By beating these cilia in this coordinated way, it can actively swim through the water and even steer food particles right into its gullet. It is an incredibly active and complex single cell. All right, for our last deep dive, we're jumping into the kingdom fungi. These are all heterotrophic organisms, which just means they have to get their nutrients from other things. And they are absolutely essential to our ecosystems, acting as nature's great decomposers. You know, you're probably way more familiar with fungi than you might think. The yeast that makes bread rise, that mold you see on an old piece of fruit, the mushrooms we eat, yep, all fungi. But so are powerful medicines like penicillin and even plant diseases like wheat rust. They are truly everywhere and have a huge impact on our lives. And even though fungi come in this incredible variety of forms, I mean, from the mold on your bread all the way to mushrooms in a forest, they all share one fundamental building block. Every single fungus is built from a network of these long, thread-like structures called hyphae. Now, fungal reproduction is this fascinating three-step dance. It starts with something called plasmogamy, where two different fungi basically merge their cells together. Next up is karyogamy, and that's where their genetic nuclei fuse into one. And finally, this combined cell undergoes meiosis, dividing up to release new spores that can just drift off and start the whole cycle all over again. So we've journeyed all the way from Aristotle's simple observations to Whitaker's 5 kingdoms. But, you know, science never really stands still. This system, as great as it is really just a snapshot in time. As our technology and our understanding of genetics and evolution get better and better, it really makes you wonder, what's the next great classification system going to look like? How are we going to redraw the tree of life in the future?